What's tough about being a juvenile lifer is you're told as a youth you are beyond redemption. And that phrase, like if you really, really sit with that, beyond redemption, it's hard to find hope and a willingness to be something other than what society has defined you as, if your sentence literally dictates you as beyond redemption.
What if the key to transformation lies in shifting your perspective? Hi, I'm Dr. Payal Beri. Welcome to Reframing Perspectives. Every conversation here is about one thing: how empathy changes the way we lead, connect, and create impact. Each episode, we get to explore deep, authentic conversations designed to expand your mindset. Whether you're looking to transform your leadership, deepen your relationships within your circle, your community, and friends, or gain clarity in your own personal growth, each episode will inspire you to see things differently and take action. If you're ready to challenge your thinking and embrace transformation, you're in the right place. Let's dive in.
We're always told and we always hear how the choices that you make in life can absolutely determine what happens in your life. Now imagine making choices at the age of 15 that lands you in maximum prison for 30 years, 4 of those years in solitary confinement at the age of 15. And imagine that you still have choices. You still have choices about how, even within those environments, that the decisions that you make moving forward can completely alter your life. That's exactly the conversation I had with Adam, who spent 30 years in prison because of a decision he made at 15. 4 of those years in solitary confinement, and how that transformed everything he has done. The way that he thinks about his time in prison, the way that he thinks about his time outside of it, what he's been doing with his time, how he's completely transformed what it means to have re-entry back into society, and how he continues to do the work and find deeper meaning and purpose because of those choices that he continues to make and see. This conversation is just incredible. It should have been a 2-3 hour episode. I try to bring to you whatever I could in the hour, but make sure you listen to this one because it is one of the most powerful stories of what true transformation can really look like. Hi, Adam. How are you?
I'm blessed. Yourself?
Good. I can't tell you how much I have been waiting for this interview, and how I just know for a fact that anyone who listens, anyone who hears your story is just going to be absolutely blown away by just you as a human and a person and the things that you're doing and have gone through in life. So just want to say thank you before we even get started, to say, thank you for being here and for everything that you're doing.
It's my pleasure. I hope we can lower the bar a little bit so I can have something to shoot towards. Otherwise, all we're going to do is go down. So we're going to disappoint a lot of viewers.
No, we're not.
Or listeners.
Well, Adam, I want to actually you have no idea how many things I want to cover. Like, this 1 hour is not going to be enough. I'm telling you right now, we're already going to do a part 2. But to start with, I want to take everybody back to that moment, 3 days right after your 15th birthday, you're sentenced to life. And you had told me when we met that you were sentenced and you went into supermax. So what were, if you can remember, those exact thoughts that were going through your mind when you realized, like, that's it, I'm going in here, and your first moments in prison?
So the first moments in prison or at sentencing or supermax, because they're all 3 different areas.
Let's go to all. Let's start with the sentencing into prison and into supermax.
Okay. The sentencing was interesting because the feeling was, and this is hard to describe, but it's like everything sort of went silent. And it's sort of anticlimactic because when I was found guilty of first-degree intentional homicide, that charge carried a mandatory life sentence. And so I knew I was being sentenced to life about a month prior, because sentencing was about a month after conviction. So I knew I was being sentenced to life. However, I thought, and I think my attorney thought, amongst many other people, that the judge would sentence me to a parole eligibility date of 13 years, 4 months. That's the minimum. And even that seemed like a life sentence on top of the life sentence, because there's 2 different sorts of life sentences. Obviously, there's life without the possibility of parole, and then there's life, at least at that current year, where the judge sentences you to a parole eligibility date. And so when we went to sentencing, the judge started to hand down his sentence, and he said, I think you can be rehabilitated in 13 years, 4 months, which is the minimum amount of time he could have given me. But to deter other youth from committing the same act, I'm going to double that and set your parole eligibility date 27 years from now when you turn 42 years old. And then I'm going to give you another 25 years for the individual who was shot and survived. So life plus 25. And I think that's when I started to kind of tune out is the wrong word, but it's almost like I could only hear my heartbeat. And so it's like everything else sort of was muffled and I could hear my heartbeat. And I really didn't know how to process it because as a 15-year-old saying that you're going to spend the next almost 30 years in prison, like my brain didn't know how to really comprehend that.
Wow. I mean, that's, you kind of think about like those movie scenes, right? When you hear that bad news and all of a sudden, like nothing else is making sense. Like everything's blurred out. And that's kind of what I'm visualizing to some degree that you experience. And you're right, like as a 15-year-old, but how is it that even as a 15-year-old, you're being tried as an adult?
I think it's mainly because society has gotten tired of young offenders committing crimes, doing shorter sentences, being released only to commit another crime. And this was in the mid 90s where, at least in Milwaukee, there was a lot of gang violence committed by juveniles. And the recourse was to send juveniles until they're 18, 21-ish in a juvenile facility, and then they're released and they're right back in it. And so society was just sort of tired of the news every night, another shooting, another juvenile being charged. And so they waved me into the adult court system, I think, as I'm tired of this, we are tired of this. And to some extent, obviously, it sucked from my perspective, but in hindsight, I understand it. And we're starting to see it again a little bit here in Milwaukee with the Kia boys who are just ravaging their community, or at least they were the last couple of years with stealing vehicles and going on high-speed chases. And society is like, just do something. And sometimes if you don't know what to do, the only recourse is a hammer.
Yeah. So you were made into an example.
Sort of.
So you hear that, and obviously now in hindsight, you can make sense of it. But in the time, right, like I can imagine as a young 15-year-old, it's like the world has ended for you. So what is that like when you're taking that toll on that, I guess the question is that, did you realize like in those moments, like the repercussions of the consequences, like when did regret set in maybe?
Regret is an interesting word. Obviously I knew what I did was wrong. I knew that I had to be punished. I knew I had to be removed from society. And for a long period of time, I really couldn't comprehend, or I wasn't able to grasp how long that was or should be. But I understood that what I did was wrong. But regret, I don't know that I, as a 15-year-old, regretted it the same way I do now. Was I sorry? Yes. Was I remorseful? Yes. Did I regret it? Probably. But I can't, if I'm being honest, separate, did I regret doing it, or did I regret having to face the rest of my life in prison? And I'd love to say that it's the former, but I'm trying to be honest, and I don't know. I do regret it now, obviously.
I mean, I think that's a very fair answer, right? Like a 15-year-old, you're not even emotionally fully developed to even understand, and then to go from that to the gravity of what's happening. There's so many complexities of feelings that are going on. So now you're a kid in an adult prison. What was that first day like?
Well, there's a lot there, because I was sentenced to an adult facility before I was found guilty. So there's the jail system where you're kind of going through the trial process, and then after conviction, then you go to prison. And so even before I was convicted, I was placed with an adult cellmate. And I spoke on this before, and I still remember, and I don't know why, because I have a terrible memory, but I still remember when the sheriffs brought me into the pod, put me in the cell with an adult. The sheriff left. Somebody from the second tier yelled down to my cellmate and asked, "Is your cellie in here for robbing a candy store?" And I remember being so mad because, I don't know why I was mad. I felt like they were making fun of me. And to some extent they were, but I was this little 5 foot, 100-pound kid with no facial hair, And I did look like I probably just robbed a candy store. Like, surely I couldn't be in here for a gang-related homicide. So I think not only did the inmates not know what to make of me, the guards didn't know what to make of me, and I don't even know if I knew what to make of myself because it was survival mode. There was instances where in the county jail where an adult male tried to get me into a cell. And thankfully, thank God that I had the wherewithal to understand what was going on. And I think it helped me understand, like, like we are in a dangerous place. So a lot of what I probably should have been feeling was masked by I need to survive and make it to tomorrow and make it to the next time these doors closed, because you're out in the day room and it's a free-for-all, and there's 2 guards, 2 sheriffs, and I don't know, 40, 50 men, and there's no way to, as a 15-year-old, defend myself against these men. And so I really had to survive, and it sort of masked everything else that I think I'm starting to understand now, 30-something years later, some of what that was.
So that's really interesting. It's like you're tried as an adult and you're put into a facility with adults versus, okay, you're tried as an adult, you've got an adult like level of like, maximum life sentencing, all of that, but we're still going to place you in a place with other 15, 16, 18-year-olds. We're not going to put you in those type of environments. Like, what's the reasoning behind that, if there is even one?
Yeah, and it has since changed. I don't know what year, but the Prison Rape Elimination Act was released by the federal government, and so now it forbids states to put youth in with adults until they've reached the age of 18. Unfortunately, that law didn't exist when I was going through the process, and I look back, there weren't some of these facilities that are built now available to me back then. So in Wisconsin, there's a couple of facilities where you can now be placed until you're the age of 25, even as an adult. And it just didn't exist in the 90s. So I think I don't take any sort of, they were trying to punish me more by doing that. I think in many respects, there just wasn't any other juveniles like that. So there wasn't any spaces built. They didn't know what to do with me. So the only recourse from the jailers or the guards or the sheriffs was, we have this inmate and we're going to treat him like everybody else because we don't know any other way to do it.
But weren't there other kids that were committing those kind of crimes that were also coming through? So where were they being placed? Or, couldn't you be a cellmate with another 16-year-old?
Yeah, there wasn't at the time, I'm sure. And I do know of other ones that would come through. But at the time, I was chronologically the youngest. I know there was another 15-year-old in the jail with me, but he was on another floor.
Got it. So, one of the things also that I think is, again, just very transformational about you is that most people who are, serving time in there, they're not necessarily, well, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but they're not thinking about, especially if you're sentenced to life or life without parole or any of this, right? They're not thinking about policy. They're not thinking about reentry. They're not thinking about legislation, but you did. But what was it like, even before we get to that point of thinking about like, how are we going to transform the way things are happening here? How did you find your way to survive prison and get you to a place where now you're out and doing some really powerful work with communities that at one point you would have seen as your, adversaries?
Yeah, it was a lot. I'm not laughing because it was funny. I think my body just doesn't know how to process that question without sort of, I don't know. And I think there's a phrase, I don't know why it popped in my head, it's always darkest before the dawn. And I know the first few years of my incarceration were just wrought with misbehavior. And I think it was an issue of, I'm trying to run from my past, and I really didn't want to see the possibility of dying in prison. And so I think I got into I know I got into a lot of trouble trying to mask my future and my past. And I would do anything rather than proverbially look in the mirror. And then in 1999, so about 4 years into my incarceration, that's really where my sentence sort of veered, and I was sent to Supermax at the time. It was a brand new facility. I was on the first bus to the Supermax facility, also the youngest inmate there. I was always the youngest inmate in places you never want to be. It's never fun to be the youngest and smallest everywhere you go. And I remember, I did the math at some point, but I remember it ended up being like 5 or 6 years before I ever ran into somebody that was younger than me. And so like for years, I was just always the youngest and smallest person. And it was in Supermax where, and I kind of get into it with some of my friends and colleagues because they're very anti-solitary confinement, as am I. And there's been a lot of case law and studies that have come out that say how detrimental to mental health solitary confinement is.
Right.
And I don't disagree with that, but for me personally, were I not removed in that manner, I don't know that I'd be here today. And I'm a firm believer there's better ways to separate somebody in prison who's getting into trouble than putting them in the cell for 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. What does that look like? It's a longer conversation, but I know for me, being sent to Supermax where in that cell was a shower, a desk, a camera, and a toilet. And it was literally 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, because I was getting in trouble in Supermax. So there wasn't like this 23-in-1 where you get an hour of exercise every day.
Oh, so it's 24 hours. That's it. You're never leaving.
Never left the cell. The only time I would
How
leave
long
the
did
cell,
that last?
probably for a couple of years. And the only time I would leave a cell would be, like, let's say I was having to be seen by the nurse, or there was a court hearing because I was charged with a battery by prisoner case while I was in maximum security prison, which is what led me to super maximum security prison. And outside of that, there wasn't any sort of, hey, let's come out and do a day room. I mean, it was Supermax. You were on camera 24 hours a day.
Wow.
When it first opened, they wouldn't even let us clean our cells. They would have an outside company come in and clean the cells for us. So I guess in that respect, they would remove me in shackles to clean my cell. And not just me, just anybody else there at that time.
Sure.
And so it was definitely a place where you truly get to know yourself. Because eventually, solitary confinement strips away all the distractions that you have self-imposed. And for me, I'll only speak for myself, I remember looking in the mirror and it was odd because I could see my dad's face in my face. That's a tough one. Because I love my dad more than anything. And to see his face in my reflection, and it helped me understand, like, I don't even recognize who I am anymore. For the last 4 years, I was trying to survive. I was rising through the ranks of the gang and literally just trying to distract myself from my current plight. Again, I deserve to be there, so I don't in any way want to say, like, woe is me or anything like that. Like, I was responsible for taking somebody's life, so I deserve to be in prison for however long God determined that to be. But I was still a human going through, like, a minute of a day. And so within those minutes, it was tough.
Yeah, I can hear that very clearly. You said that, like, if you hadn't been put in that situation, then you may not be where you are today. So what was it in those, like, was that moment where you saw, again, your dad in your reflection, was that obviously every micro moment is leading up to an aha moment, right? But what was that moment, if there was one, that you decided, I can't be doing this. I need to change that around. Like, this isn't okay, you know? And a side question to that is, like, while you were in Supermax, was your family able to talk to you? Were you able to have any kind of, conversations with your parents?
Yeah, I believe at that time, on the level I was on, we received maybe 2 8-minute phone calls a week.
Mm-hmm.
And I was able to speak with my dad, my son, my mother. And I'm thankful for those 8-minute increments of some sort of, hey, I still see you as a human. And yeah, those moments of looking in the mirror, like, that wasn't the moment that you're referring to, because the moment came, and I'll hopefully never forget it, where I was in solitary, obviously getting into trouble, fighting with guards in solitary confinement, to which they have a response for that, and it's they suit up in riot gear and they call it a cell extraction, where they run in your cell and forcibly remove you, cut off your clothes, and strap you down to in this case, because it's different for different states. Sometimes it's a chair, sometimes it's a mat, and for me it was like an 1.5 inch rubber mat that they strapped me down to. And I was 19 at the time, and I can remember vividly looking, because obviously I'm like this, so I'm looking down, and the window, the whole front of the cell is windows, and there was a tour of, I don't know, 15, 20, 25 people standing outside, and I'm in my underwear strapped down. And there was a tour because the prison was brand new, so they're always having the media come in, politicians, other stakeholders, to see the new supermax facility that was going to essentially make Wisconsin safer. And that was just a terrible feeling of, I don't know that I've ever felt less of a human than looking down at my underwear, seeing, I don't know who these people were, but just how they looked at me, I could almost reverse the role and see this little 19-year-old strapped down and in his underwear, thinking like, oof, what do his parents think about him, or what does his son think about him? Because I had a son, and it was, I can't remember how much longer, but the moment that you were asking about came vividly. And I think I described to you, I hate when people say they find God in prison, because the implication is God is lost. And in this case, I was. And so in my literal worst moment as a human being, that's where I feel God found me. And like, I didn't hear voices from heaven or anything like that, but it was more of just a feeling that, hey, you tried it your way. How's it been working out for you? Not well at all. I suck at it. And I think it was literally not knowing what to do next, not knowing how to get to the next moment, that just made me give up the fight in a way, and I just let everything sort of come in. And I can only describe that as, I don't know, God's love. It's hard to put into words what that feeling was, but it was in that moment that I said, I'll never hurt anybody ever again. And over the next couple of days, because it took me, I think, 8 hours to get unstrapped down. Don't know how to properly phrase that.
Yeah.
And then another 2 days to make it back to my normal cell. And that's where I wrote the gang leader and said, I'm done. Like, I can't do this anymore. Giving my life to God. I'm going to try to keep kids from ending up like me. And I still remember sliding that letter out of my door, because I was afraid of what was going to happen, because there's repercussions for leaving a gang in prison, and they're not pleasant. And I knew if I could slide the letter out, and if I could get it back, I would second guess myself. So I slid it out as far as I could, so I couldn't possibly second guess myself. And thankfully, it's the only good thing that came out of 4 years of solitary confinement was I had about 3 years to go for them to kind of be less angry with me and my decisions to leave the gang.
Wow. I have no words. I mean, just the visual of that, the window and being seen that way, objectified, completely treated like, again, not a human. I can only imagine how, like you mentioned, it's like everything has been completely taken from you. And so the only thing you can do in that moment is really face yourself and face your decisions and face, what am I doing here with this? When we actually met up for lunch a few weeks ago or last week, you talked about just that one of your purposes that kept you going is that you wanted to, meet the father, David, of the kid who was killed. And your feeling was like to being able to make sure that, he was okay, that, you got some kind of you knew that, he understood that like I am in regret, like I'm sorry for what I did, all those things, and that he had, some justice to give to him. And I know I'm skipping way ahead, but like once you were, you came out and you were going to go meet David for the first time, you had so much that you were going through that you were thinking of that, and then you shared that the meeting with David was so anticlimactic for you. But all this time, it's almost like he was your North Star. He was almost like the person that was driving your purpose to be a better person. But then all of that kind of came to a close after meeting him. And then you had to like refigure out like
wait a second, if that's not my purpose, what is? I'd love for you to share that with the listeners and just for them to understand like what it was like for you to, now you've gotten to that point of like, okay, I'm going to be a better person. I'm not going to hurt anybody. Then what? Then how did you tie that to your purpose of like truly reforming while you're in prison and everything you've done? We'll get to that part afterwards, but I really wanted people to hear the story about that purpose that you had that led you to successfully leave.
Yeah, it was probably 14 years into my sentence before I had contact with David. And I didn't know what they were doing, what they were thinking, the family, Robert's family. I just know after about 5 years when I made my change and dedicated my life to trying to prevent other Roberts from dying, I've never been a halfway sort of individual. So it's like 100% full tilt all the time. And it's a blessing and a curse. So I just immersed myself into trying to keep kids from being like me. And I would speak with thousands and thousands of kids brought in the prison system. And eventually the paper here in Wisconsin did an article about my anti-gang work in prison. And it was that article that, unbeknownst to me, was read by David. And he reached out to me and wrote to me. And it's weird for people to understand this because he was my purpose. Even though I had never talked with him, I sort of looked at, and it wasn't just him, it was just Robert's family in general, as this group of people that I hurt unimaginably. And so to make it up, which I know you can't make something like that up, but that you have to process it in some way, I was going to try to work for the rest of my life to unring that bell that can obviously never be unrung. But at the same time, guilt was sort of coming into my consciousness, and we spoke earlier about regret. And it was at that time that I really started to feel it. And God was first and foremost in my life, and in my prayers at night, I'd beg God to not let me wake up in the morning. I was too afraid to commit suicide via taking pills or cutting my wrists, because, I mean, all that stuff you can access in prison. But I was never brave enough to go that route. But I would beg, and this is always so weird to me, like I would beg my creator to kill me in my sleep. And it was tough. And when the article came out, a few days later, I received that letter from David. And I wanted him to tell me just what a terrible human being that I was, that he hoped that I died in prison, because I think that's what my guilt wanted to hear. And to me, that logically made sense. And that would fuel me more like, okay, I did this terrible thing. I deserve to be punished. And this is how I'll continue to drive myself. But his letter was the most positive letter I've ever received. And it was him thanking me for what I'm doing in his son's name. And they asked the family, because I received another letter from his grandmother saying, can we send you some books? Like, how can we help you do this work more effectively?
Wow.
And they literally changed my prayers, and I stopped asking God to take my life and just to sort of help me help others. And so good and bad came from that. So now he did become this North Star that I still sort of, even though received a positive letter of forgiveness, and I told him when I wrote him back, I said, I will never tell you that I'm sorry, because you tell somebody you're sorry if you like bump your car or something like that, but you don't say I'm sorry for taking your son's life. Because there's a phrase I would end up learning, and that's your choices are like voices that speak for you. Mm-hmm. And so I wanted to show him with my choices that I regret that moment, because I would work to help others for the rest of my life.
And that's true, like, reform, right? Right there. That is the true act of, like, it's not just the words, it's not just the I'm sorry, I'm never going to do that again. But it's like you took that so deeply into your heart, your body, your soul, everything. And so for you to have starting the anti-gang movement, writing your book, passing a bill, like creating those, what was it? You have the Act 233 that you wrote while you were still incarcerated. And it's just all of those things, though, like, to me, it's like I see that, I'm just like, that's exactly what we want to see, right? There was an act that happened that should have never happened, but it did. And
So your actions are showing the actual transformation. It's showing that, like, you know, you are someone who is deserving of that second chance.
I hope so. And to sort of get to your second question of the meeting with him, because you have to like fast forward almost 30 years, because there's a whole process of being able to meet with your victim's family, and I wanted to make sure I was doing everything right. But finally, I was given permission by the Department of Corrections to meet with my victim's father, David, and he lived in a different state, so I ended up getting a hotel, driving down there, and was going to meet him for breakfast in the morning. And again, he and I had a decent relationship over the next couple of decades, where he would eventually advocate for my release to the parole board. And so I knew he had forgiven me consciously. Subconsciously, and this goes to that North Star aspect, the inner me kept telling myself that he and his family are still suffering the same way I was, because I was, in some ways, still that 15-year-old.
Yeah, you were
'Cause
removed completely from, and we talked about this. It's like you're 15, you get put into this system. Of course, you're in solitary confinement, right? You're completely like stuck in that moment. And when you're coming out, you're meeting yourself back at that point. But David and his family, they've been existing and they've been able to move. So yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's the part that I'm just starting to understand now. And it's tough because there's really no there's no user manuals on how to deal with that. And it's what's driven me. So there's a double-edged sword with that. So it's driven me to essentially work myself into the ground to try to create a safer community. But then when we were supposed to meet, it was that morning, and I talked about this a little bit, but I think it's a good visual. As I was driving there and watching the GPS count down from 13 minutes, 12 minutes, 11 minutes, somehow I got in my head that David is here to kill me and to retaliate for me, because he's older, he's retired, and this whole thing has been a ruse to get close to me, to take vengeance on his son. And I remember driving to, now it's 9 minutes, now it's 8 minutes, thinking, okay, if I sit down for breakfast and he pulls out a gun, like, what should I do? What is my moral obligation? Do I allow him to shoot me? And I wondered stupidly, like, would he shoot me in the chest? I hope he doesn't shoot me in the face. Do I just let him? And then I was resigned to the fact, now it's 4 minutes, 3 minutes. Like, I was almost in a terror at that point. Like, I just want to just keep driving, because I think facing somebody via letter that you have caused irreparable harm to is different than facing somebody literally face to face. And thankfully, I look back to the different times in my life where I was scared and I faced fears, because I think it was those training sessions that allowed me to turn into the parking lot and face whatever he had in store for me. I think I convinced myself that vengeance is justice. And he published an article with that name that you read. And I thought it would be a fitting fate to end it this way. And then I saw him, and the phrase anticlimactic is, I don't know. I know I use that. It's a placeholder, because I don't know what to say there. Again, because I knew consciously he had forgiven me. But at that moment, the subconscious expected to see a grieving father. Because again, I was stopped in my time frame. And to see him not crying was the only thing that I really couldn't process. And even then, I wanted him to like slap me, or I don't think I wanted him to shoot me, because I was like, that's gonna hurt, which sounds so stupid. But I wanted him to like cuss me out, or just grab me by the neck, or something like that. And he didn't do any of those things. And it was a very sort of, as I step back, he's had 30 years to process, and I know that the pain will never go away from losing a son. But clearly, and I view him as an elevated thinker. Like, he's so intelligent to me. I think he's just able to process grief. And so it was just the lack of anger that left me feeling sort of, okay, I've been doing this work, running myself into the ground for 5 years since I've been out because my brain has convinced me he is suffering. I'm not saying he's not, but visibly he was not. And I didn't know how to process that.
Wow. So how do you take from that moment where I know you shared with me that how disappointed you felt and then redirect a new form of purpose that you're still doing that impact work? The work has not changed. The reason behind that work has, the North Star, it's no longer associated necessarily with David and the grief of that, I would say. It still, I think, has the underlying of, what I'm really even hearing is more of if his role in the bigger scheme of things, if you being able to hold on to that purpose, right, through that time before meeting him is what also helps you to become this more reformed person, this, impact driven person, the person who's trying to make a difference, really changing the way that, safety is seen, gang violence is seen, all of those things. Then in a way, it's almost like it served its purpose. Like he served the exact purpose to some degree. Also what David has written in the letter of like, he wanted, and because of his philosophy and the way he lives, he wanted to just fill you with a lot of compassion and with a lot of love. And if anything, that love and compassion is what fueled you being able to do the work that you were doing while you incarcerated everything. Would you say that, maybe there's a way to look at it from a place of like, well, that was the closing of that chapter. And now as you are free and as you are out and, I know you mentioned that you're also free of parole now and, you have that piece. It's like, you're really getting that second chance of like, now I get to really be free in the way that I want to think about the work that I'm doing and the impact I'm making in that North Star versus like this period of time that you were incarcerated and all of that was just woven in so much with David, Robert, and that whole family. And now it's like that chapter, it served its purpose. That lesson was there. And now you're like, maybe it was a freedom, like a freeing that because he didn't respond with that, like if he did have responded the way that you were thinking he might have, maybe it would have still kept you in that same space, in that same story.
For sure. And everything you say, consciously, I agree with 100%.
Yeah.
And it seems perfectly logical. But we as human beings are insane.
Of course.
And choose to throw logic to the wind.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think hearing and contemplating more on sort of that way you phrase it, I hope so. Because there was some moments where, especially like the following week, where I was like, okay, yeah, why am I doing this work? And then it sort of gravitated towards, because this is what I'm meant to do. And there doesn't have to be a negative reason or I'm making up for or trying to unring the bell sort of reason. And most days, I'm able to process that. The days, because I'm still an imperfect human being. I still, I don't commit crimes or anything like that. But I still hurt people. Not like I'm out there beating somebody up, but I might hurt somebody's feelings unintentionally.
Emotionally, right.
Yeah, just a plethora of different ways where I hurt another human being. And if I do something like that, and that guilt comes back, with that guilt comes sort of that past. And then it's sort of, see, we told you, you are a, can I swear, piece of shit?
Yeah.
And you will never be anything other than what you were yesterday, even though I preach that, like I'm in the business of second chances. And it's like I'm all for giving everybody else a second chance, but I refuse to give myself a second chance. It's so hypocritical. And I'm conscious of that. Mm-hmm. That's the maddening thing, is like I'm conscious of it.
Yeah.
And yet I am incapable at times when the days are bad to do anything about it. And it's frustrating.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I think, though, that if you really go back to seeing, especially for people who are in the world of impact, a lot of times you can tell exactly what that person is struggling with themselves because of the work that they're so passionate about. And if you were to be like, all right, I'm good, I don't know if you would be that same level of drive for what you're doing. And so, and not to say that people need to live in a source of like being a masochist or, and just being in that tortured space. But to your point, like honestly, as humans, I don't know if it's possible for humans, and this is probably a whole other existential conversation, but I don't know if it's possible to live in this way of the work that happens without having some type of internalized internal constant conflict. Like I feel like that conflict is what can create and does create that level of like passion, purpose, impact, and connection to what we're doing.
For sure. I definitely think that there's some truth to that.
Yeah. So, you know, you're doing incredible work. You're bringing together, I mean, you've done things like bringing police and formerly incarcerated and have them go skydiving together. You know, you bring together individuals where they're, victims of families and, individuals coming together, cops coming together, and they're cooking together and they're having a meal, like people you wouldn't expect to be in the same room together ever, having those conversations. Something that you shared is you work now close with people in the DOC. You work with people closely in the government, passing bills and, making policy changes, all of those things. And something that you have shared is the misconception that people have around, how hard it is. It's like, no, actually they welcome you in, like they want to work with you. And so first question is, how do you get to a place where you're like, I want to work with these people who were the same ones that, have kind of created these systems that are intolerable?
Hey, I think that's a long conversation as well.
I'm telling you, we're going to have like 3 series of this.
Right. I mean, the short answer is I feel I'm a pretty logic-based human being, and I see logically there's only one place to get to a better place for all of us, and that's to collaborate with one another. Growing up in prison, like my last interaction with a police officer before I was arrested was a couple weeks before my arrest, and I was walking through an alley, and I don't have any reason to lie now, but I wasn't doing anything wrong. And this undercover car pulled up on me and a friend of mine and put a gun in our face, made us lay down face down in the alley, and searched us and then let us go. So as a 14-year-old, having the police put a literally gun like right in my face and screaming to lay down in an alley didn't leave me with a good just sort of interpretation of how police should act. I get, again, in hindsight, why they were doing that, but I was forced to live with that for the next quarter of a century as I was in prison. And then growing up with guards or governmental officials that would put out memos stating that we want to keep violent criminals in prison for the rest of their life, essentially saying you are beyond redemption. And that's, I think, what's tough about being a juvenile lifer is you're told as a youth you are beyond redemption. And that phrase, like if you really, really sit with that, beyond redemption, it's hard to find hope and a willingness to be something other than what society has defined you as, if your sentence literally dictates you as beyond redemption. And that's an episode in and of itself.
Yeah.
But when I was released, and I don't understand why this transpired. A couple things. God's a comedian and had my sister fall in love with a police officer. And of course, and so that was kind of like my first brush with the police post-release. And he was just going through the police academy, and I was invited to his graduation to become a police officer. This is like months after I'm out. I remember looking around, I was like, there's like 200 cops here. I was like, what in the heck is happening? But it was sort of a realization, though, that because they were all nice, and I was like, they're not the boogeymen that I've created in my mind. And as I started to work in this space, this reentry space, the organization, they were very pro law enforcement, which is very, very unusual for the reentry justice reform space, because it's usually anti-law enforcement, defund the police, that sort of mentality. And this group wanted to bring cops and the formerly incarcerated together. And the position that was created for me just happened to have that as part of it. And so I was thrust into this, okay, well, bring the two sides together. And I was like, well, I don't know what does that even mean? And so I came up with a couple ideas on how to sort of build bridges, and that was actually the name of the session, Building Bridges with Law Enforcement. And you have to structure in a very formal way because each side, there's tension there. And if you kind of allow an open forum, it'll go sideways quick. So I learned very carefully that it has to be structured. There has to be food, because I feel if you break bread with humans, you're able to sort of see each other as human. I don't know how food has the ability to do that. And then it started working. And then I started to see officers who weren't what the news or media portray them as. And there's bad in every
Right.
sector, right? There's bad teachers,
Yep.
DAs, nurses, firemen.
Yep.
The police, what I started to see, they're no different. But I predominantly saw these officers were good, and they wanted nothing more to make our community safer. And so when I see that, it's hard to look at them with this negative slant that society does. And then I can't remember the day, but I know what hit me, and that was, it's psychological. Oftentimes, the formerly incarcerated, currently incarcerated, we have a problem with authority, and we don't respect it. And the reflection or the embodiment of authority is a police officer. And so I think we sort of look at police officers as authority. And if we don't like the police, if we feel the police are trying to hurt us, it's easier for us to go against what they're about. So if you reverse engineer that, and I'm formerly incarcerated, and I see a police officer who is leaning into my life with love, care, compassion, it messes with your mind at first. But then it starts to change that narrative, correct that narrative of authority isn't out to get me. They do want me to succeed. And so then I started to realize that law enforcement, police officers are some of the most important people in the reentry journey that nobody or very few people are sort of dealing with. And I leaned into it, and it brought me into some extremely crazy places of, as I said, going undercover into the police academy and 10,000 feet in the air with police officers and just trying to find different ways to humanize one another.
Yeah, I think that's the most powerful part and right now could not be more timely, is regular general public seeing that we don't have to pit each other against each other, because that's only going to keep sustaining the things that we're doing, right? It's only going to double down on criminals need to stay in and, no redemption. We're just invoking fear constantly. We're working and pitting against with fear. Your model is so much about compassion and kindness and humanity, right? Let's see each other as human beings, and we're not different from each other in terms of how we live, exist, and be, and what we want. So what would you say now, as your life's mission and the work that you're doing, if there's one thing that you would want the general public to really understand, and how could they champion, this, if we're talking about true reformation, if we're talking about truly, bringing two sides of the same coin in a way, right, together to be able to build that trust. If you had control of the media, if you had control of this is what general public needs to really understand, what would that be?
Well, I guess first of all, if I was in control of the media, I'd make there be an 80-20 split of, because everything is 80-20 or 90-10. Was it the rule is 90-10? So let's go to 90-10. 90% of your broadcast has to be something positive, highlighting pro-social things that people are doing. And I get there's news, there needs to be a, hey, this is what's happening in our community. But it doesn't, to me, it seems that's the opposite. To me, it's 90% negative, and then you'll get one of these community highlight where it's 14 seconds of, oh, there's this great group and back to the murder. And it's we can't keep living in this, and especially this 24-hour news cycle of, we're inundating ourselves with this subconsciousness of humans are evil. Humans are negative. Somebody is the enemy. It's us versus them. And we don't want to be the them. And it's we're all somebody else's them. And I think I would hope society at some point, and I see a lot of it now with politics, we're not all that different. And it is shocking. If police officers and the formerly incarcerated are crime survivors and those who have committed the most heinous acts can come together and break bread, why can't a Democrat and a Republican? Why can't a Packers fan and a Bears fan? Because that's about as far apart as a Democrat and a Republican. What is it going to take? And unfortunately, I think it's going to be some heinous act that just shocks our senses. Sort of like when 9/11 happened. I think on September 9th, the country was very divided. And then September 11th happened, and I think it was such a heinous act that we didn't know how to process it. And it was one of the things that I actually respected about George Bush, is he seemed to be the right president at that time to sort of bring people together. And I'm not trying to get into politics of left, right, or anything like that, but it was one of the first times, and I was in Supermax when that happened. And I saw society sort of come together like, hey, I don't care that you're a Bears fan. I don't care that you're a Packers fan. I don't care what you subscribe to. Like, we are hurting as a nation. And for a time, I felt we sort of did come together. And then, obviously, well, look at today. And so I hope, but I'm not hopeful that it's going to take another heinous act, something so unmanageable that it's going to shock us to, I don't care what you subscribe to. I'm going to love you as a human. I wish society could get to that point without something negative happening.
But don't you think that some of that is just so it can be temporary? Like 9/11 happened, it brought community together, but then here we are again, another divide. And then, not to get into this one, but Luigi happened and healthcare, and that somehow brought people together. It's like, oh, wait a second, it's not about blue versus red, it's about classism. And then now that's become a conversation about things happening here, right? And I do think you're right, like in the sense where for some reason people just don't like do something until something dramatic happens, right? Like your life, case in point, you went into solitary confinement 24 hours, 7 days a week in order for something dramatic to happen and change to happen for you. So, I think there is just a human element to that. But I also think that the reason why we subscribe to that is because our society and culture has just allowed living in a fear-based environment to be like, we literally, we may be modernized in so many ways, but we still, our biological, cells still think from that survival mode space. And it just feels like with the media and with everything that's around, it's like you are just conditioned to continuously stay in the space of fear so that you're not allowed to think about what if. And I think that 90-10 split that you're talking about, it's that reverse. It would allow people to think, and it's almost like maybe there's a certain group of people in power who don't want public and society to think that things could be any different.
Yeah, and I hate to go down the conspirator sort of road, but it's hard not to, right? Because it's seemingly like anybody who I talk to, because I feel like I'm pretty central when it comes to the circle that I have. I have people super far to the left, super far to the right, in the middle, like, because I don't attach myself to any side. And when we talk to them, human to human, we all seem pretty much the same and want us to all get along. And like, I include governmental officials, elected officials, police officers. I mean, they're all in this kind of ecosystem that I'm referring to. And we all seemingly, when we're talking face to face, have the same goals. But it's like when we sort of pan out, that's where all these different narratives, and it's like, well, who is thinking it is a good idea to have the 90-10, 90% negative, 10% positive? Like, somebody's making that decision. And it seems like, well, I would like to talk to this person or these people or they, whoever they is that we self-create in our mind of that they are the problem. And I don't know. I mean, it's difficult to sort of point the finger, and at the end of the day, should we point the finger at the mirror? Because we're all part of, like, we complain about the news being so negative, but yet we're watching it.
Right.
Correct. We consume it. And so maybe if we all, I know there's all the boycotts out there, maybe we just boycott media and kind of just force their hand. You know what? We're tired of being inundated with negativity, because you can't help but to sort of process that. Like, you just hear a certain type of music for your entire life. I mean, you're going to love it or you can hate it, but you're not going to be able to not hear it. Yeah. So this the same thing with negative media. Like, we're hearing it all the time. It is affecting us.
Yeah. I feel like so much of our conversation today is really about that rewriting of the narrative, whether it's at the individual level, whether it's at the relationship level, or whether it's at the larger society community level, right? It's just that what we see, what we kind of create is a manifestation of what we believe. And so you clearly had a incredible transformation, and now, doing the incredible work that you're doing with policy and working with, again, last week when you told me about how, these individuals in government welcome you and they're like, oh my God, opening doors for you. It's like, yes, please work with us. It's not what public would think, because public is trained to think that they're going to be pushing you out. They're saying like, we don't want to work with you, but you're literally showing them like, no, that's not the case. They're very willing to work. They want to. And I think to your point, it's like, maybe the narrative is like, we need to stop villainizing everybody. And part of that villainizing, like you said in the beginning as well, is like, so much of the othering is that we are also the other for the others, right? And so to bring it full circle, it really does start with, what are you willing to change the narrative of, in the way that your biases are, the way that you perceive somebody a second chance in life, in the community. So there's so much more that I know has to be done, and there's so much more that you are doing. I'd love for just everybody to know like how they can learn more from you. I know you've got your book that's also going to be coming out, but just really curious of like, how can people really connect to understanding, of course, your story, but also the stories of like hundreds and thousands of other individuals, and just the reentry process that, we really need to change the narrative around.
Yeah, I would say that it's pretty, and I hate to use quotes to say easy, it's pretty easy to find organizations in your community that are trying to help those that have made mistakes. Just Google it, like Google reentry organizations near me, and go volunteer. Like, just show with your actions what love and support is. So that's something fairly tangible and easy that you can do. For me personally, yeah, my book is available now, The Trenches of Change. And I don't know if you'll include a link on your podcast, or you can go to my website. It's being hopefully or will be finished in the next week, adamprocell.com, and it'll talk about a lot of the stuff that I've been doing and trying to do, and it'll have links to my books there as well. But really, it's not about me. It's about, what do you want the community you live in to be? And people are given different hands when they're born, and sometimes the hand is good, sometimes it's bad. I don't feel people are born evil. And if you don't feel people are born evil, then you have to show, it's our obligation to show those who have been dealt a bad hand, a poor hand, what love looks like. And go find a way just to volunteer. And just, again, show with your actions here. Your choices are like voices. They'll speak for you. And so what do you want with our society?
Amazing. Thank you, Adam, so much for being here. I just, I will say, like, the meeting you last week in Wisconsin, going to the huddle in Wisconsin, where, you got to see the love, the compassion, and just the genuine, like, desire, commitment to, like, seeing everyone, like, succeed with their small wins. And this is something that came up last week when at the huddle, and the huddle is a space where people can go to, get that support system that they have after they've been released. It was magic, because I tell my friends, I'm just like, we can take a page out of the book of these individuals who were dealt, one of the worst hands, but they've come out, they're making changes, and the level of no judgment, true compassion, kindness, and just seeing them and each other as humans, that is something that we are struggling with right now, big time. And we need to change that. And you're such an anchor in making that change happen with, of course, the work you're doing at Paradigm Shift and everywhere. I think that it's important that the message that you're sharing, the transformation you're sharing, that it's possible, that, that idea of no redemption, like, that is a lie. And you're showing that in the work that you're doing to help people have that second chance, change their lives around, transform that, what you were doing inside of, when you were incarcerated, all of those things. Like, we need more of that as inspiration for the kids that are, possibly choosing to make decisions that are not going to be sending them the right path.
I appreciate it. And I'm just trying to do my part. Like, I did a lot of wrong in this life, so I'm trying to make up for it and just trying to do my part. And to your point, I think if we all just do our part, nothing changes if nothing changes. So we have to change something.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Adam.
Thank you.
I really hope that you enjoy this episode. And I just have one favor to ask you. If you could just make sure to hit that subscribe button, leave a rating and review, it's going to help us tremendously to make sure that we reach as many people as possible that you think should be listening to our episodes. I'll see you next week for another episode, and thank you so much for leaving that one review, that one subscription, and sharing this with your friends.